Hey, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're here with return guest Gerald J. Leonard, and he has an upcoming book called A Symphony of Choices: How Mentorship Taught a Manager Decision-Making, Project Management, and Workplace Engagement and Saved a Concert Season. We'll be talking today about these things like harmony, adaptable leadership, emotional intelligence, and so much more. So, Gerald, glad to be talking with you again.
Robert, it's so glad to see you again, and I'm so glad you invited me back on the show, and thank you for having me.
Very glad to have you. You were one of my very first guests. I think you were like the 5th or the 7th, and so many years have passed since then. The technology has changed so much. You and I have grown so much as people and in our skills that it seems like so long ago, I barely remember our conversation, but I still remember some of these ideas about like the symphony, the orchestra, how everyone plays a part, how there's an amount of stress and showing up, and how that can also be a good metaphor for our workplace and the productivity that we do. So, I mean, to get everyone caught up, can you tell us about yourself, what makes you special, what you have going on these days?
Man, you just summarized my whole book. So that's awesome. No, but since the last time we talked, I think we might have even talked when I did the second book, Workplace Jazz.
Yeah, at some point you came back, but who knows what year that was, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think this is my third time you and I talking. Well, with this book, A Symphony of Choices, it's a business novel. And, when you first write a book, you learn a lot, you go through the process, and you think writing the book is all there is. And then you write the book and you go, hey, there's whole nother industry to learn about, how to get the word out about the book and share your ideas with people. And I think with the third book, the biggest thing I learned was to build a great team. And so I went out and found some amazing coaches who have worked with the likes of Jack Canfield and Stephen Covey and others, who could coach me as I wrote my book, and work with a fiction writer, because it's a business novel, because it really teaches some principles of a course that I taught and created back in 2015. And when you develop a course or develop something that you think is really good content, I always say, honey makes the medicine go down, right? Because so that a good story helps the principles sink in. And some of my best books that I've learned from have been written as stories, have been written as novels. And just even recently thinking about the whole Ted Lasso show, there's a lot of business lessons in that show, and we take them in because the show is so good. It's so dramatic. There's so many different angles, all these different characters. And so I leveraged the concept of storytelling and, just a really good through plot and multiple characters and dynamic characters, and they got to work through issues to teach some of the principles that I want to teach in my book around the idea of decision making, workplace engagement, changing careers, working through things even when you have relational issues, even while you're trying to raise your kids, even when the economy goes or there's a pandemic or all those different things that happen. It's really about getting the message across in a way that people can embrace it.
I love that. And so you made sure to embrace the fun, and it seems like that's what the storytelling and the entertainment is about. Like we all had our whatever childhood generation. There was always some kind of like learning aspect where there was the fun plus the learning. Like for some reason, what comes to mind is in school, there was like this thing called Schoolhouse Rock for us, where we learned like math and stuff like that. And it was even old when I was a kid, like it was from the 70s and reused.
Both of us are sitting here smiling about that. So I think we're dating ourselves. But that's okay.
Probably. And I'm sure the kids have some newfangled thing that we don't even know about. And that's okay.
Exactly.
And it's like, and it can't all be fun, right? It can't all be silly. You do have to sneak the medicine in there, but I can definitely see how it can just make it just less dry and make it something that's different. And so all those things that you mentioned there, you mentioned about things like, career changes or life changes or pandemic changes. And what comes to mind for me hearing some of that is there's that saying, don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. That like there's things that we have to step up to. And even just before this call, you and I were talking about like, kids growing up and how there's rewards, but there's also stress and time crunch and responsibilities. But that's okay, that it can all be part of a package where the you have to step up, you have to show up. And if you wish that you didn't have stress, if you didn't have problems, that's the wrong thing to be wishing for. You should want a positive, a right amount of stress. That way you can become a stronger, better person and solve some of these problems in front of you.
Exactly. Since the last time you and I talked, and I think this happened to me, it happened to me in 2018. I doubt you know about it, but I had a major bout with vertigo, and the vertigo impacted what's called the vestibular system in me. And the vestibular system deals with your balance. So I was rushed to the hospital, spent a day and a half there. They had to give me medication to make the vertigo stop. But when it was all said and done, I literally lost the ability to walk. And I had to show that I could even move around with holding like a walker to get around the hospital, or at least walk down the floor and show the doctor that I could go home by using this walker. And that happened 6 weeks before a TEDx talk. Talk about having some challenges. And it really was like in my face. I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I decided to set a goal to do the TEDx talk. And, my talk was on what if practice performance, the neuroscience of music, because, all my books have a musical theme because I'm a musician. And I did a lot of research on the neuroscience of music. And it said that, if you haven't any damage neurologically by playing music, it'll force the brain to rewire itself. So I spent literally a week in bed. And once I went through that, I got up and was able to play my bass, get to my office and grab my bass. I played for a little bit, went back to sleep the next day and got up and did that for a few days. And within a short period of time, within 3 weeks, I walked into my doctor's office unassisted. And 3 weeks later, I walked on stage. And there were two lessons that I got from that, because that situation exposed a lot in my first marriage. I've gotten remarried, but exposed a lot. And the two things I learned was, when tough things happen, don't just go through them, grow through them. Okay? Don't just go through it, grow through it. In other words, don't wish for it to get easier, wish that you get stronger. And then the other thing was to decide to get better and not bitter. Because when you go through something really difficult, and people around you that you're trusting in and hoping in and so on, and things change, you can make a decision to be a victim and get bitter, or you can make a decision to be an advocate and get better. And so I made the decision to grow and get better. And because of that, my life has radically changed. I have two companies now. I had a company that invested in my company because of things I was going through. And also the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, a lot of people were, especially musicians, were playing music online to encourage people who were just kind of sitting at home. So I did the same thing. I did that. A few guys who had worked with me in the past saw me playing and said, "Hey, I didn't know you played so well. By the way, do you have some time on your hand? I got a client in India that needs some help. And by the way, we're looking for a company to invest in, and we know you, and you got a great company. Let's talk." And from that, I had a major investment in my company, wrote my second book, and then wrote this book, the new book. And with that was going to networking events and so on, was introduced to a publisher at Wiley. And they read my book, saw my proposal, and said, "Hey, we want to purchase your book, and we want to help you bring this to the market." So, when difficult things happen, I think we can decide how we're going to respond. We may not be able to stop the event from happening. Jack Canfield teaches this a lot in his success principles, that when bad things happen, it's how you respond. Or when difficult things happen, the economy, the American culture, or whatever the case is, when difficult things happen, it's not the event that determines the outcome. It's our response to the event. And if we respond by saying, "I'm going to learn and grow through this, get coaches and people around me to help me to grow, and I'm going to get better and not bitter, be willing to forgive and let go and move on," it's amazing the things that God, the universe, will bring into your life that you weren't prepared for, and it will take you to a depth of learning and growth that you would never have experienced if you made a decision to just kind of go through it and get a little bitter about it.
I love that, how there's, I mean, and people always talk about when bad things happen, whether it's pandemic, recession, personal life, whatever, that you can either step up to it or give up. But you're saying it's not even just going through it, but also growing through it, that you become a stronger person than you would have without all this happening. And I mean, we've all known someone like that who's like given up at the first sign of something going wrong. When we say, well, did you really give up because the pandemic happened, or were you looking for a reason to give up, and that just the right opportunity came along and you said, oh, finally, the perfect excuse. And so it seems to me like you're kind of digging up some kind of thoughts in myself, where like when the difficulty happens, it motivates me to try harder. It's not just a matter of being like, well, I'm like a resilient person and this, conflict or the struggle's happening. I'm like, well, I lean into it. I'm like, when I come across an obstacle, that's a signal, not just to keep going, but like to try even harder than I would if that hadn't happened. And so like when you go through some of these things that you've gone through, like with the vertigo and the divorce and the pandemic and all these other things, like what motivates you, or what got you into gear? Like, did you have a period of like feeling sorry for yourself, or a period of panic, or like how did you kind of make the mental shift from A to B?
Yeah, it was tough. When I first laid there, because for the first week, all I could do was lay in bed. I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't look at my laptop, couldn't watch television, had a ringing in my ear. And so you're just sitting there thinking like, is this my life? Is this how I'm going to, what's going to happen to me? And then you kind of get past that and you go, okay, I got to figure this out. And I got to, so I started rehearsing my speech, because I planned to do this TEDx talk and I'd been selected for it. And I started thinking about my life and all the different things I had gone through, and realized I had already overcome quite a bit. And, one of the things I've learned since going through this is that transformational change, that we always talk about wanting to transform and have transformational change in our life. And one of my coaches, a gentleman named Dr. Paul Shealy, he teaches the concept that transformational change starts with transformational learning. And honestly, it was making a decision to set a goal, but then making a decision to learn whatever I had to learn to overcome the challenges that I had to overcome. So I had already spent quite a bit of time learning about neuroscience. I spent more time studying about neuroscience. I read different things. I started going I started either watching them online or going to workshops, reading books, doing seminars, and learning I learned something about brain gyms, which is like body movements. Because when you go to vestibular therapy for the thing that happened to me, which by the way, is still a quote unquote disability. I don't call it that. I call it a constraint. So by having this constraint in my life, I had to go to work and go, okay, I have this thing in my life now that is limiting what I can do. How do I work around it and work with it and not be angry about it, but embrace it and figure out how to make it work? By doing that, I learned all about, I just read everything I could about neuroscience. I found coaches, and I went through this whole process of transformational learning that created transformational change. And I can tell you today, I have become more productive as I'm dealing with, my constraint than I was before. Like even today, I think I've had a couple of meetings. I had a workshop. I took a nap in the middle of the day because I knew I had this podcast and this interview with you and the conversation. I wanted to have my energy up. I had a meeting before this, and I balanced out my day to manage my energy. I wouldn't have done that before. I would have just kind of kept running. And by the time I got to our discussion, I would have been pushing myself to have energy. Because I've learned to manage my energy better. I've learned the things that I need to do. And I learned that, okay, it's okay if I need to take a nap in the middle of the day. And if I can't go to sleep, what can I do to still get the same effect? All those things were things I had to learn, but by learning them, it allowed me to transform in ways that I could not have transformed, finding the right coaches, finding the right people, and then finding the right support around you. Because sometimes the people that were in your circle, when you go through something like that, don't understand or can't support you. And so you have to then go out and find the right people that can provide that support. And to be honest, as I've learned, I mean, I've done things like Qigong. I've learned, I've gotten into yoga. I've gotten into meditation. All these things that are, basically allow me to get centered and focused have allowed me to write this book that I wrote and find all the coaches and folks around me to help me to write something that I think is going to make a big difference in people's lives, because it deals with all these issues and how transformational learning creates the transformational change. And I think if we try to go into creating transformational change without the transformational learning, it becomes very frustrating.
Right. And I can imagine why. And especially because you're stuck in your old ways of thinking, right? If you're not learning
Exactly.
and you're just like trying to use the old in order to solve the new. And so that's a really helpful concept, just to always be learning and if you have some kind of a difficulty situation, medical or otherwise, just to learn as much as you can about it, because that way you learn about why things happen. You learn about what other people have done in your same situation to solve that problem. And I mean, you're making me think about how, when everyone always wishes they were younger, right? But then I recently been thinking about, man, like when I was in my 20s, I had all this energy, but also I did stupid things like staying up all night. And I can't even, I think it's been like a decade since I stayed up all night. But back then, right, I would think nothing of it and then wonder why just my emotions were all over the place and energy and brain not always functioning. And so in some ways, youth is not all it's cracked up to be, because it's so random and so all over the place. And then there's also that aspect with youth of when you look back at the friends you had in high school or in kindergarten, you think like, really, I was friends with people like that who treated me that way, but you didn't know that yet. You didn't yet have the criteria of who is going to be helpful to you and who is not. And now that we have all these decades on us, now when you assemble this team, as you put it, and you find these coaches and your support system, you kind of have like the intuitive criteria, and you know what red flags to look at, and you know what sort of feedback and behavior you won't tolerate. And back then you just would tolerate because you were just going with what you have. And so always be learning. That's an excellent just tip in so many different contexts. And we're beginning to wind down our conversation, I want to make sure that we get into a snapshot of the book, because it sounds amazing and you have these stories and these lessons. So is there a favorite lesson or chapter or story in the book that you feel like sharing?
Yeah, it's actually when Jerry Hall, who's the main character of the book, gets in touch with a coach, and his name is Dr. Richardson, and it's an old professor, because Jerry's been a musician for 20 years, and now he's won the job to be the orchestra manager. So he has to do all the business aspect of the orchestra, and he's like, okay, I gotta brush up on all this stuff. So he reaches out to an old professor who then starts mentoring him, and that's where all the lessons come in, and he's mentoring and training him in all this. But he also has to help the board understand the value of what the musicians are bringing to the table. So he creates this meeting where he brings different musicians in, and they perform in front of the board, but then they talk about the price of their instrument, the fact that they have their bachelor's, their master's, and even their PhD, because some of the board members in the book were thinking, well, music is a hobby. And they didn't realize how much, these musicians had put into their craft and how much they had invested, and that some of the instruments these musicians, and this is a real truth about classical music, or even some of the jazz musicians, that their instruments can cost as much as a car, like $25,000 just for an instrument, if you're getting a quality instrument. So when they learned that, they realized that they needed to, one, increase the salary of the musicians, provide them with more support. And he was able to help kind of navigate and be an advocate for the musicians in this new role in front of the board, and really get them on board, if you will. So there's a lot of lessons in there like that, where it's teaching buy-in and workplace engagement, but it's doing it in a very visual way, if you will, because a lot of the words that are being used creates a visual picture of what's going on, and a lot of different characters. But and he's had his challenges. He had his challenge with some health. He has his challenge with his marriage. But you see him work through it, and you see him work through the thought process. And so as you're kind of reading about Jerry going through the different challenges, you're sitting as the reader on the same side of the table with Jerry, being given the same information, being given the coaching. So by the time, and it's really called project learning. So by the time you finish the book, you've actually kind of gone through this journey with Jerry. And so as he's transformed and dealt with all these things, you're seeing how you can deal with the things in your life. And I've gotten some really great feedback from people who've read the book. And, I wanted to make sure it was a business book, but people have told me they are really engaged with the story and the storyline, and that it's a really intriguing story. And it really is it's a gripping story. In fact, one of the writers from Business Insider wrote an article about Ted Lasso, and he quoted me in the article, and there's like 2 paragraphs where he quotes me about a Symphony of Choices and comparing a Symphony of Choices with Ted Lasso, and put a link in his article to the book, saying that just how engaging it was. So I was really excited about that.
Amazing. So you're accomplishing so much. You've got the TEDx talk, you've got the Wiley Publishing, you're mentioned in Business Insider. What's next for you? What do you have that's got you excited about the near future?
Well, I've started my own podcast called Productivity Smarts. I have, like I said, my second company is Productivity Intelligence Institute, where I do a lot of coaching and training. And, there's a landing page that people can go to learn more about it. In fact, I've made it really simple. It's productivityintelligenceinstitute.com/Robert Plank. And so basically just take your name and put it together at the end, but it's Productivity Intelligence Institute. I'll make sure you have the link for the show notes, and people can go there and, learn more about the things that I'm doing. And, I'm basically working on my 4th book right now, which it will be called, it'll deal with something around productivity smarts, because I really want to share the journey that I've kind of gone through with increasing my productivity, but at the same time, reducing my stress, doing yoga, becoming more mindful, becoming more thoughtful, and just kind of growing myself again, through transformational learning, through making a decision to get better, not bitter, and making a decision to grow through the challenges and not just go through the challenges.
I love it. And I like your kind of catchphrases, your rhymes, because that way some of these important lessons, they stick to us. And you said that URL is Productivity Intelligence Institute /Robert Plank. And
yes.
The book is Symphony of Choices. And where do you have like a hub or a main website call to action where we can find out all about you specifically?
If you go to that site, for the listeners, they're going to find out everything about me. There's all the links that they need to know. There's a number of downloads. There's a companion guide to the book there that they can get for free, that teaches them about the value, the 6 core principles of project management. There's a weekly evaluation worksheet that I use for my own productivity. And even if they say, hey, I really want to reach out and then book a call with you, Gerald, and just to understand some of the things that you're doing, there's a link on there that they can even book a call. And there's my social media links as well on LinkedIn if they want to follow me there, on Facebook, and so on, or even my email. They can reach out and email me.
Wonderful. Productivityintelligenceinstitute.com /Robert Plank. You're quite an innovator, sir. And you think about the musicians that you like or the bands that you like. And I think the ones that are the most memorable for me are the ones that are prolific, right? You think about like these kind of classic. I mean, I think I've heard everything there is from the Beatles. I'm kind of over the Beatles, but then these other bands that they persist throughout the decades. They're always coming up with something new. Those are the ones that I have a lot of respect for. The ones that they don't just rest on their laurels. They don't just repeat the old stuff. They're always working on something new. And I mean, musicians.
You're still in the thunder for my next book, because my next book, Productivity Smarts, is going to highlight and for the last 2 decades, the most prolific musicians of the 20th and 21st century, and basically what can we learn from them when it comes to productivity. And I'm going to incorporate a lot of the things that I've written around productivity and the neuroscience and things like that I've learned, but I'm going to leverage that whole concept of the of prolific musicians to kind of tie in the music to it.
So we're on the same wavelength right there. And yeah,
exactly.
And a lot of people don't know that, you know, musicians, they're really hardworking people, at least the ones that are skilled, and they always power through and fight through that difficult work. And some of the things you've been mentioned about, like your energy management and spacing out the day, I think those are all things that, you know, maybe some of us haven't thought of, or maybe could dial in a lot better. So people need to be checking out your book. They need to be checking out that landing page. That way they can break out of the infinite loop of their limited thinking, where their mindset so far has only gotten them this far, and you need that extra help. You need the team and the coach to get you to that next level, to get you to where you need to go, because otherwise you're running out of time, right? I mean, if you were born and you tried to invent algebra or calculus, you'd spend your whole lifetime. But, you know, you could open a book and learn from all the past centuries that they present the answer right there for you, and then you can build your own thing on top of that. So a symphony of choices: how mentorship taught a manager decision-making, project management, and workplace engagement, and saved a concert season. You should check it out, by Gerald J. Leonard. And as we're winding down here, do you have any final parting words of advice? Do you have like a favorite lesson or quote, or just something to really cap off our whole conversation?
Well, you know, I always say, I tell my friends sometimes that people can be like crabs in a barrel. And here's what I mean by that. You know, you have friends around you, and if you start changing like crabs in a barrel, they can pull you back. But what you have to do is find a new barrel of crabs that are much higher and doing better than you are, and surround yourselves with people who can pull you up and not pull you down. And so sometimes when you're going through changes, you know, the people around you may not adjust to those changes that you're going through, and that's okay. It just means that you need a new barrel of crabs to be around, of people who are at a higher level, that are working at a higher level, that are thinking at a higher level. And guess what? They will pull you up to their level. And that's what I've had to do as well. And with reaching out to coaches and building relationships, is that those things happen. But if you just keep growing, you'll find the right group and support group around you to help pull you up, because we all need that help.
Very helpful. Something to definitely be aware of is find the better barrel of crabs that pulls you up instead of pulling you down. And hopefully, ideally, Gerald in his book will be someone in your better barrel of crabs. So go check out Gerald Leonard's book right now. We'll see you there. And thank you, Gerald, for showing up again, and for blowing our minds with your experiences, with your uniqueness, and with your insights. I really appreciate you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me here.